Hey everyone, welcome back to Coded Row. In this video, we're going to be going over animation blueprints in Unreal Engine 5. So for the purpose of this tutorial, you can head over to Mixamo, download whatever character model you want, or you can use the default mannequin. You can also just extract the animations from these models and download animations and just use it for this project. But for the purpose of this tutorial, I will be using the Cinti asset, and of course they have a day and a half left on their sale. I highly recommend you check out my affiliate link in the description below to check that out. And they just came out with this amazing sword combat animation that I'll be making videos on as well, but I will just be using their base locomotion animation stuff for this video. This comes with 247 animations as FBX models. There are a ton of things that are very useful for this tutorial that we'll be going over, and I'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing you want to do is head over to your Epic launcher and launch a 5.4.3 project or whatever you're working on and hit launch. And once that's loaded, I'll just hit games and go to third person just to start from a third person project. And I'll just call this something like Cinti anims and hit create. So now that my project's up, I'm just going to import my Cinti anims. So after I downloaded my animation based locomotion source files from Cinti, I'm just going to double click into the folder. And the first thing I'm going to import is actually the character. So I'm just going to right click. So before importing the character, I'm going to right click, create a new folder called the Cinti, double click to go into this. And then I will just import over the characters first and make sure skeletal mesh is checked. I'll hit import all and you'll see that these are set. And then before I delete this material, because this is just a plain white material, I'm going to want to import that demo texture. So I'll go back, import demo textures, and you'll see that it has two stuff, which is the polygon texture or the dummy texture and the apocalypse one. So I'll hit control save. So I'll just double click to open this up and add this polygon dummy texture in here and just plug it into the RGB and delete this one. And then I'll hit save. And now when I go back to my characters, you'll see that it is set and looks beautiful, just like Cinti has made for us. So I'll hit control save or control shift save to save all. And now I'll go back to the main folder and we still need to import the animations and the demo models. So I'll just go ahead and import those demo models. And now when I import the animations, I'm going to select that skeleton that we imported earlier in the character folder. So it'll say to select the skeleton. I just need to select that polygon Cinti character skeleton. And I'll hit import all. And now once those are done, you'll see a folder for feminine, masculine, and neutral. I really like that about Cinti. Honestly, I feel like it's hard to find feminine type animations in case you do have some girl characters in your game. But for this one, I think I'll probably do some masculine type animation. So when I go ahead and just drag this into the level and I'll just simulate play right here, you'll see that there is an idle animation and then also a crouch animation or a crouch idle. There's a bunch of in-air animations that you can check out and locomotions and stuff. And we'll go over quite a few of the basic runs and all that. So another thing I want to do is actually make sure these are set to root motion. So when I click animations, I'm just going to filter, look for animation, and then select animation sequence down here. And now I'm just going to hold control, click A to select everything, right click on any of them. And under asset actions, you'll look for a edit selection via property matrix. And now all the enable root motion is off by default. But when I look on the pin columns search by here or on the right side, you'll see pin columns. When I search in root, there is an enable root motion. So I'm going to select all by holding control A while one of these are selected and then check mark this enable root motion. So it'll enable root motion for everything. And I'll hold control shift S to save everything, and it might lag or freeze a little bit for you, but don't worry, it's all just loading. And now that our animations are ready to be animated, let's go ahead and go back to the Cinti folder, uncheck this filter. I'll actually right click and just remove all filters just to close this down so this is more visible, and head back to my Cinti folder. So the first thing I'm going to do is in my character folder, let's first go over what an animation blueprint is. So an animation blueprint in Unreal Engine 5 is a specialized type of blueprint used for creating and controlling complex animation behaviors for characters and other animated objects. So it allows developers to visually script animations using a node-based interface, making it easier to manage and customize animations without writing extensive codes. So we'll go over state machines, Blendspaces, the anim graphs, event graphs, and so on. So let's go ahead and create an animation blueprint. So in order to do that, I just need to right click and you'll see this little window to add assets into our content, to add assets into our game. So while we're here, I'm just going to select animation and select animation blueprint. Now, after clicking this, it's going to ask us to select our skeleton. And if you have multiple characters that are sharing the skeleton, for example, let's say I have all those Cinti skeletons onto this polygon Cinti character skeleton, then all of them can share the same animations and your character won't go into weird T-poses. So I'll just select this and create and click create and hit create. And I'll just call this something like I'll just call it something like Cinti underscore ABP, and I'll double click to open this up. And when we double click this to open it up, we'll be presented with an anim graph and an event graph. So the anim graph determines what our output pose will be. So this is pretty much what's going to determine at the end what animation our character is supposed to play. And we can do this by manipulating the variables in our event graph combined with state machines and blend spaces and so on. So this event graph is like a normal blueprint graph, so we can find information to store as variables and feed it into the animation graph. So on the bottom right, we have an animation preview where basically we can select certain details of our animation, such as turning on root montages from everything, montage, or such as turning root motion from montages, everything, and so on, and other little details that we'll need later on, and an asset browser, which gives us a preview of all animations that are connected to the skeleton we've selected. So you're going to see with the Cinti one, there are a ton of options. So good thing they have this little search assets field. So for example, if I wanted to look for an idle pose, you're going to see tons and tons of idle pose. But if you hit space and look for other keywords that are in the title, it'll look for that too. You don't have to get it 100% right. So for example, if I look for idle MASCU stand, it's going to give me the exact one of the masculine standing pose that I'm looking for. So the first thing we're going to do is create a state machine. So head over to your anim graph and you're going to right click and you'll be able to just type in the search bar to look for a state machine. And what a state machine is animation blueprints utilize state machines to handle different animation states, such as walking, running, jumping, etc. Each state can have its own set of animations and transition rules, which allows for smooth transitions between animations based on conditions like speed or input. So I'm going to call this state machine something like, so let's just call this locomotion. And I'll double click to open this up. So over here on entry, basically when our characters are loaded in, we're going to be able to determine what state it's in. So I'm just going to drag out this entry arrow and let go anywhere on this event graph or this anim graph. Then I'll click on add state. And this is pretty much just going to define our state condition. So I'm going to type in idle. So as soon as the game starts, our character will be in idle state. And now let's double click to open up and go into this state. So this state will pretty much have an output result graph saying output animation pose. And all we need to do for this is look for that idle pose. So I'm going to look for that idle standing masculine pose and just make sure that it's connected to this output pose. And when you click on this animation that you drag into your graph, make sure that looping is checked because you don't want your idle animation to just play once and then stop. So I'll hit save. So I'll double click anim graph to open this back up. We actually want to connect our locomotion state into the output pose result. So now you'll see this character change when I hit compile like so, and you'll see him looping in an idle pose. And now that we created this idle pose and set it to looping, we can actually create a character with this right now. Head over to your third person map, default pawn class, select that BP third person class and click on this magnifying glass to find it in your content browser. Double click to open this up. And all I'm going to do is just change this mesh to that Cinti polygon Cinti character like so, and that we can see in the viewport. And I'm going to change this anim class from the AVP Quinn to Cinti like so. And you'll see that the character fixes right up. And the reason why we're not making a character from scratch is just because all the stuff in the event graph is already set up for us. And this is going to be a lot easier to follow. So when I hit our third person map and hit play, you're going to see that our character is in an idle pose. But if we moved around, he's still going to be idling around and it's not going to look so pretty. At least he is idling and it is a looping motion. And the reason that's happening is because in our animation blueprint, in our locomotion state, we only have an entry of an idle. So now let's go ahead and try adding a movement. So when I drag this out, I'm basically telling my animation graph that from idle, I can go into another state. And in this case, I'm going to click add state and call this one movement. And the movement will be handled by a blend space. But in this case, let's just go over adding a simple movement animation. And in between this movement state to an idle state, you'll notice that there is a little arrow that's going back and forth. And this pretty much when you hover over it, it'll say there has to be a transition rule to tell our animation blueprint of when to go from idle to movement. So let's go ahead, double click and open this up. So what I can do for this is I just need to make sure there's a way to check and tell my animation graph that if my character is moving, then I want him to basically just play a different animation of my character running, for example. So in this case, I'm just going to need to create a variable and I'll just call this velocity. And I'm going to change the velocity type to a vector, just like that. And I'm going to drag this out into the graph, kind of like your normal blueprint graphs. And I'm going to select get velocity. And now this is actually very simple. All we need to do is get the length of this vector. So I'll look for vector length, just like that, and select that. And then I'm going to drag this out. And if it's greater than 0, then that means our character is moving. So if it's greater than 0, then we are moving, and this will be set to true. So we can enter this transition. So I'll hit compile and save. Now back in my anim graph, which I'm going to go back to using these breadcrumbs up here, I'll go back to locomotion and double click movement. And now basically if our vector.length of our velocity is greater than 0, then we should be able to play an animation here that we need to set. So I'm going to look for the forward running just like this. I'll compile and save this, and I'm just going to test this out simply by going to our locomotion, double clicking that transition rule, and then setting the velocity to a higher value. And you'll see, okay, so I made a mistake here, and I'm actually glad I did. So you'll see when I set my velocity to something high, it played the running animation once and not again. So what I need to do is reset, or I need to set my running animation to be looped again. So go back to locomotion, double click movement, highlight over this, and you'll see a loop animation button in your details panel. So I'll hit compile and save. Now I want to go back to locomotion, select the transition, and I'll go to velocity and just set it anything higher than 0. So if it's higher than 0, it's just going to keep playing this running animation, and that's exactly what we're looking for. So I'll hit compile, save, set this to 0 again, go back to locomotion, and now we don't want our character to be moving forever. Eventually he's going to get tired out and he has to come back and go back in an idle state. So what I need to do is just drag on the outside of the borders where it's highlighted white when I hover over it, and then you'll see this arrow pop out, and I just want this to go back to idle. And before I let go, it already tells us that it's going to create a transition, just like that. So now we're going to double click on this transition, and it's going to tell us the same thing. All we need to do is just check if our velocity is going to be 0. So I'm going to drag out velocity, get velocity, drag this out, and get the vector length again. And now this time we're just checking if it is 0. So I'll do the equal sign, and I'll just leave this as 0. So if it's 0, then it's going to go back into the idle state. And I'll hit compile and save, and go back to your BB third person character. Make sure your anim class and skeletal mesh is set up, and I'll go into my third person map and actually just try this out. Control P to hit play, and F11 to full screen this, and Shift F11 to hide the Windows taskbar. And now even if we were to play this right now, you'll see that it's not going to work. And that's because we need our event graph to feed our animation data, because right now current velocity in the vector length is just stating that it doesn't know that it's connected to our character movement speed. So let's head back to our animation blueprint and go to the event graph this time. And this time you'll see two nodes, event blueprint update animation and try get pawn owner, which is already set up for us because these are very, very generic and usually almost always used when creating anim graphs. So what I'm going to do is try to get pawn owner, and what I need to do is actually get the velocity of our character. So I'm going to look for get velocity, and the return value of this will actually just be current velocity. So we're going to get the pawn owner and then get the velocity. And what I need to do is make sure that the pawn owner is valid in order for us to trigger this event blueprint to update the animation. So I'm going to drag this out and look for an is valid node with the question mark at the very bottom. And the input object will actually be our pawn owner to make sure that there is a pawn owner that is valid. And if it's valid, I just want to set the velocity. So I'll drag this out, select set velocity, and I'll connect this to the is valid, and the get velocity will return to the return value to velocity. And I'll highlight over all three of these and hit Q on my keyboard to just straighten it out. So basically if you are getting a little messy and so on, you can just highlight above these, click Q, and it'll even out for you, just like that. So I'll hit compile and save. So now when I hit play, you'll see that my character will start playing the running animation, and when I stop, it will go back to idle, and run, and stop, and run, and stop, and so on. So it looks pretty clean, but we are using just a simple run animation instead of a blend space, so you'll see there's some weird movement going on here when I go in circles. So now let's go ahead and change that run animation to an actual blend space to give our character some better locomotion and smoother running transition. So I'm going to go back to my Cinti ABP, head back to my anim graph, open up this locomotion state and go to movement. So a blend space will in Unreal Engine 5. So the blend space will be used to interpolate between multiple animations based on one or more input parameters. It's typically used to create fluid and dynamic movement animations for characters, such as blending between walking and running based on the character's speed or direction. So what I'm going to do is head over to my third person map, and I'll go exactly where my character folder is or wherever you left your ABP. You can organize this more however you'd like, but over here I'm just going to right click, and under animation there's an option for a blend space. There's also, when you go to legacy, there's an option for a blend space 1D, but in this case we're just going to use a regular blend space because we're going to be moving on a 2D axis. So I'll click blend space and select my polygon Cinti character skeleton, and I'll just call this movement underscore BS for blend space, and double click to open this up. So on the left hand side, you'll see the option for a skeleton tree, which just shows all the skeletons of your character, and asset details, which give details about the character animation blend space itself. So you'll see stuff like use grid, vertical and horizontal axis for your graph here, and the combination of these values will interpolate and determine what animation our character is going to use. So for example, the name of the horizontal axis in this case, let's call this direction. And you'll see it update over here on the bottom too. And the minimum axis value will be -180, which is going to be backward. And the maximum value will be 180, which is going to be forward. And I'll just select snap to grid just to get some more accurate measurements. And the vertical axis will be called speed. The minimum value will be 0 for our idle. And the maximum value will be how fast your character can go. So Cinti characters, they come with running animations and sprinting. Yeah, so sprinting and running and walking. So it comes with quite a few animations: sprinting, running, and walking, and idle. So I'll set the max value for me to be around 600, which is pretty default. And I'll click snap to grid. You can double check how fast your character goes by going into your BP third person, going to the character movement, and you'll see the speed section, and you'll see max walk speed, which is 500 for me. I'm actually just going to change this to 600. So I compile, and I just want this number to match my blend space here. So now I'll just collapse these just to make it look neater. And essentially you want to place the values in accordance to where your graph is. So for example, 180 is our forward and -180 is our backwards. And then 600 is our max speed. So anything closer to the top is our highest speed. And anything closer to the bottom is our idle state. And then to the right is more forward, to the left is more backwards. So in the asset browser, I'm just going to look for a sprint. So sprint f_masculine will go at the very top middle here because this is going in a straight line. So -180 will be backwards. So now let's look for a left. So if it helps, you can just right click your content browser and enable content browser 2 like so. And I can just navigate to my animations folder and get my animations from here and just drag and drop into my blend space. So as we can see, our direction forward to backwards over here, or forwards to idle. And then this side will get our right animations and left will be on the left side. So now what I need to do is just look for a left to put here, right to put here, and back strafe to put on each corners because 180 and -180 are still behind us. So when I look for my animations, I'm going to look for this forward. Actually, I just need to do left and just drag this on the left over here. And in order to preview it, you can hold Control and move this green arrow that'll automatically connect to your mouse while you're in this little graph. So when I move left, you're going to see my character also moving left when I get closer to this left animation, and back to the middle is forward. So now let's look for the right one and put this on the right. And then I'm going to look for a back strafe like so and put them in each corner. So now I'm just going to add the idle animation at the bottom and the corners just to give it a little bit smoother run. So I'm going to look for that idle standing masculine, and I like to put them in each corners along with the middle bottom, just like that. So now you'll see that when my character is sprinting and goes down to idle, he'll stop. So right now he's kind of walking, but it's not the greatest. So we'll go ahead and add some walk animation. So I'm just going to look for walk and just pretty much just match these. So the corner ones are walking backwards. So I'm just going to add that walking backwards and put them in the bottom corners like so. So that when he is like this, he's just walking backwards. When the speed is low and it's still at a 180-degree angle, he is going to be going backwards and just walking. And I'll look for the walk forward, plug it down here so that he can walk forward, go from idle to walk forward to sprint. And then I'll also look for a walk right, plug it right here. And I also want to look for a walk left, like so. And this looks pretty good to me. So the speed will pick up and blend nicely into it. You can also right click these in order to change the animation it's using and also change the speed, direction, and the rate scale, and so on. This is probably the most common way to use a blend space, but it's not the only way. You can use it for crouch animations, jumping animations, dodge rolling, and so on. So now I'm going to click the save button and go back to our ABP. And I'll delete this run forward animation and look for that movement_BS and plug this in. So now we have direction and speed output as parameters that we need to plug in. So for the speed, we're just going to get the velocity and then get vector length and then get our vector length and plug it into speed. What we need to do is go to the event graph and get our actor rotation. So let's go ahead and try that out. So back in the event graph from our try to get pawn owner, we're just going to get actor rotation. Get actor rotation like so. And now I want to plug this into a calculate direction by getting our velocity and our actor rotation to see which way our character is facing. So I'm going to drag this out and look for a calculate direction. And the velocity of the get velocity will plug into this velocity right here. And the return value, so I'm just going to promote this to a variable called direction. And I'll set this right after the velocity like so. And this value will be a value between 180 and -180, as you can see when you highlight over the calculate direction here. And now we just go back to our movement state, and I'll drag in this direction variable and get direction and plug this in here. and hit compile and save. So now when I go back to my BP third person character, I'm going to click on character movement and scroll down to some settings. So I'm going to turn off orient rotation to movement and turn on use controller desired rotation. And now my character will strafe just like the animations we set. And when I hit F11 and hit play, you're going to see my character actually moves around quite smoothly. And personally, I wish I could see, I wish I can turn the camera on and see the front of my character, but we'll go ahead and go over that in the next video. And there's no jumping animation, so it's going to look a little odd if you try to jump. But as you can see, the animation, the legs are moving exactly how we want them to transitions. So we can go forward, backwards, left, right, and then it'll also blend with our diagonals. So if we go forward and right at the same time, forward left, and backwards right. And in the next video, we're going to be going over jumping and a few other features. And just remember that Blendspace isn't only for movement and stuff like that and jumping around and crouching and all that. There are a lot of things you can do with animation Blendspaces. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment below. Check out my Patreon to support my channel. If you want any of these Cinti assets or this animation pack, be sure to use my affiliate link in the description below. It does really support my channel, and I am really grateful for each and every one of you. Feel free to join the Discord community. We have an active member of Unreal developers, JavaScript, web development, and so on. Thanks for watching Code of the Row. Like, subscribe, comment below what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.